If you have your Bibles, please turn to Numbers chapter 13. How many of you know that the Holy Spirit can interrupt his service? How do you know that? We don't apologize for that. Because God can do more around these altars and through prayer than what man could ever think of. What man could ever do. Let me ask you a question. Do you like to take risk? Do you like to take risk in life? Well, the older that I get, the more safe I want to be. I don't want to take risk. In fact, I take things a little bit more cautiously now than what I used to when I was younger, because it seems like things are a little bit more riskier for me. Things I could do as I was younger, now it's kind of like I don't want to chance that. A definition of risk is this. Risk is to expose to hazard, danger, or loss. Wow. To expose to hazard, danger, or loss. That's not a good thing, is it? You see, sometimes we look at that word risk, we kind of look at it lightly, but the truth of the matter is, when you take a risk, you are in a virtue chance of a hazard or defeat, danger, or loss. Because with every risk, there's a possibility of loss or injury. I think of one of the person who epitomizes a risk taker is Robert Craig Knievel. You may know him as Evil Knievel. Now, all of our kids are going, who's that? That's Evil Knievel right there. Yes, older generation, we know Evil Knievel. We know all the stunts and all the risks that he took. He was a stunt performer and an entertainer. In his life, he made more than 75 ramp-to-ramp motorcycle jumps. Not just over one car or two, but over multiple vehicles. And in 1975, he jumped 13 buses at London's Wembley Stadium. And I thought we need to take a look at this. This is a man of risk. Let's see how it turns out. Ooh. Didn't go too good, right? Didn't go too good, did it? Did you know that he fractured his pelvis? That accident? Did you also know that on that particular accident, he fractured 2 vertebrae as well? He broke his hand, but Evil Knievel walked out of the stadium. He came back and he told the audience, the fans, he says, I've got to tell you that you are the last people in the world who will ever see me jump again, because I will never, ever, ever jump again. I am through. And 3 days later, he came out of retirement. That was his last jump. Out of his 75 jumps, 20 times he crashed. It says that he had broken more than 433 bones. Multiple, over and over and over again. For Evil Knievel, the risk wasn't too great until it came to a point where he said, I'm finished. Now, some of us may call Evil Knievel crazy or out of his mind. Yes, it's true. He was a daredevil. He would always push the limits. But we are faced with risk every single day of our life. I'm not talking about hang gliding or surfing or jumping cars on motorcycles, but you face a risk every day on your job. What do you mean? how you perform and the things that are required of you. There's some decisions that you have to make. You can either make the right one or the wrong one. You have to take a risk, and you have to make a choice. Because if you make the wrong choice, if you risk that, you will lose something in the process. We take risks not only on the job and our employment, but also there are risks on the roads. How do you know that? You get behind the wheel of that vehicle and it is risky. Not only other drivers, but should I pull out now? Should I wait till that car passes? You see, those are all risks that we take on an everyday basis. How about in your home? In your relationships? With your finances? You see, there are risks that we always take. You see, we have to make all kinds of decisions where we are at stake of losing something. Things about the present, decisions about the future. Risk. We are faced with risk every day of our life. Did you know that there's also a risk when it comes to serving Christ and following Him? It is true. There is a risk concerning that. Because following Jesus is unpredictable. How many know that? Those that have lived for Christ for a long time, there's certain things that just happen that are unexplainable. You go through uncharted territory. You go through areas that are unfamiliar, and you feel like you're on edge, and you have to make decisions, and you're taking risk. Sometimes, let's be honest, we feel like the wind is pushing, filling ourselves and taking us on great adventures. There's other times where it's limp, and there's no wind, and we're asking God, what's up? We feel stuck going nowhere. In Christianity, there are struggles, but yet there are also victories. There are painful sacrifices, but there are joyful celebrations. This morning, I want to share with you about the risk of faith. The risk of faith. The heroes of faith in Hebrews chapter 11 experienced mountains of persecution and valleys of doubt. They faced impossible odds and improbable circumstances, but they said yes. Despite the circumstances, despite the odds or the risk, they said yes to God. What did David do? David ran towards Goliath when all the others stood in fear. He was taking his own life at risk. He was representing the entire nation of Israel. That was a great risk. What if he would have lost? What if he would have been defeated? He was virtually at a place where he could have lost everything. Noah took a risk. What are you building that boat for? What's a boat?
That's right.
What's an ark? How long did it take him to build that ark? 10 days? 10 years?
120 years.
How many, Wayne?
120 years.
120 years. Boy, I'm sure the neighbors had something to talk about, didn't they? What was he risking? Humiliation? Hard effort, hard work? But God told him to build that ark. In fact, because of Noah's obedience, he and his family, they're the only ones spared from that flood. Then you look at Moses. What did he risk? He risked everything. He said he chose to be a follower of Christ and to be called the son of Pharaoh. There he obeyed God and he followed in faith and he stepped out in faith. And there God brought deliverance to Israel. They were willing to risk everything and stepped out in faith. Fill in this statement on the very top one. Faith looks at the odds and reasons God is greater than any risk that is present or looming. In other words, it looks at the odds and it looks at the risk and they calculate and they look at it all and then they reason. They reason with God. And they recognize that God is greater, that God is bigger, and they recognize that whatever risk is present or looming or in the future, doesn't matter. They will step out in faith. You see, faith doesn't need a map. Faith does not need a guarantee. In fact, faith doesn't need a lot of answers. It's just faith. Noah, 120 years, what do you need? I don't need a map. I don't need a blueprint. I don't need answers. I just know God said that this is what's going to happen. You look at David, you look at Moses, you look at everyone in Hebrews chapter 11. They looked at mountains and they crossed them when it needed, and at times they moved them. You see, that's what faith does. Faith takes risk. It looks at risk, and it takes those risks. Here in Numbers chapter 13, Israel stood on the border of the promised land. You see, God had delivered them from Egypt by great miracles, with signs and wonders by a strong hand. There was no question. Israel knew that it was God behind all of it. With the 10 plagues, by Him providing for them, separating the Red Sea, providing for them as they came to the promised land. And there, God told Moses, Moses, you pick out one man from every tribe. You send 12 spies in the land, and I want you to spy out that land and to investigate it. For 40 days, those 12 men went and spied out the land, the promised land, that God says, it is yours. I've given it to you. As they went, they spied out the land. They brought back a report. You see, God wanted Israel to know what they were up against. He wanted their eyes wide open, not shut. Why? Because He wanted them to respond in faith and in obedience. What was their report? In Numbers chapter 13, verse 26, this was report. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh. They brought back word to them, and the congregation showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land to the south. The Hittites and Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Wow. It says, and Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. How many of you know that you cannot rationalize faith? You can't measure faith by logic. Faith isn't measured that way. It's not something of faith where you measure all the pros and cons or all the positives and negatives. You don't put it on a balance or a scale and see which way you should go or the decisions you should make. That is not the way faith is made. It doesn't happen that way. You see, the spies were laying out all the pros and the cons, everything before the people. They brought back the grapes. They brought back great big clusters of grapes. Yes, the land was flowing with milk and honey, literally. Everywhere you looked, fruit, vegetation, abundance, growth. It was covered. It was a land of prosperity. And when they looked at the land, they saw all those positives. Those were the pros. But then they reported all the cons, all the negatives, all of the risk. He said, there are strong people there. Cities are fortified, well built, very large. The men are giants. The people are large. Everywhere we looked, there were people in the mountains. Everywhere we look, by the sea and by the fertile banks of the Jordan, everywhere you look, there were people who were fortified and strong and dug in. See, the scales were tipping to the negative side very, very quickly. And bad report. They were saying the task is too difficult, victory was improbable, and the risk was too great. What are good odds? A gambler will tell you what good odds are. Is 50-50 good odds? Is it worth taking a risk when it's 50-50? Some will say yes, some will say no. Some say, I want better odds. I want a lesser risk on my part. How about 80-20? You see, the risk level for people are different on every area. But the truth is, everyone knows there is not a sure thing. There is not 100% guarantee to win. There's always that slightest chance. Nothing is a sure thing. Of course, Caleb quieted the people here in verse 30, which I read, and he said, let us go once take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. He said the odds are in our favor. God is on our side. We are well able to overcome. You see, Caleb was trying to build their faith, assure them of the outcome. Now, this was certainly admirable and not wrong, but faith isn't something that can be managed. It's not something that we can convince others about. It is not strengthened or made by odds or by probability. Fill in this first statement under risk managers. Faith isn't the assurance of favorable odds or certainty of absolute guarantees, but an unshakable confidence and deep conviction in a known God. When I put these sheets together, oftentimes I try to find the shortest words or the most powerful words so you don't have to write a lot. But when I was filling this statement out, these words just jumped out at me. Because you have to realize that faith isn't the assurance of favorable things or absolute things. It's based upon some things that seem unshakable, that are unshakable and deep. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That word substance means the assurance or an unshakable confidence in God. You see, the world believes that nothing is certain, which it is not. But there is one thing that is certain, and that is God. You see, my confidence and my faith is not in the world, but my faith and confidence is in Him. And this confidence brings me an assurance. An assurance of every hope that I have. It is not an optimism or an illusion. It is being sure of what's hoped for, despite the not known or the unknown. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. You see, we can't be sure of things when we can't see, but faith is the conviction of the unseen realities. Faith is trust in the unseen and the unknown. Faith doesn't have to see things. Faith doesn't have to have anything proven to them. It simply takes God at His word, and that's it. That's final. Yes, at times they waver, they waffle. Sometimes they're a little bit shaky. But Jesus says, the faith of a mustard seed. A mustard seed can move mountains. You see, that's the type of faith that we're talking about this morning. The faith that will take risks. Not because the odds are in their favor, but because God is in their favor. It's a conviction. A deeply felt belief and a deep confidence and an assurance that everything is going to be okay. Faith is not blind, friends. It's not blind to reality. There's a lion in the path. Yes, there's a lion in the path. We don't ignore the obstacles. We don't ignore the risks or the odds, but we see something greater. We see something beyond that. We see something even surrounding that. Remember when Elisha, when he was at the gates of the city, when the city gates, the city, they walked out, and there the enemy's armies had encircled them, and the servant was fearful. And Elisha prayed that his eyes would be open, and his eyes were open, and the mountains were filled with the armies of God. What do you see? See, that's what faith sees. Faith is not something to be managed. It is not something to be manipulated. It doesn't reside or begin up here. It's not based on logic. It's not based on reason. It's not based in our mind. It comes from in here. It is not managed. There's some people today that claim they can manage their faith. Yes, I'll do it if. I'll do it if I, and we have to admit it. There's times within our lives that we don't step out in faith or follow God because we think the risks are too great. And so we try to convince ourselves. We try to weigh all the obstacles, and we try to make it come out so that we will at least step out, even just the slightest a little bit. Faith isn't proving anything. Faith is getting to the point and a time in your life when you just seek God and you dig deep. And then He reveals Himself. There are some people that are risk managers. And then there are people, number two, that are risk avoiders. You see, Caleb wasn't convincing them. No way. His statement there, it was not a convincing statement. But we read in verse 31, but the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up to the people. They are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people who we saw in it are men of great stature. And we saw the giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight. Risk avoiders. You see, those 10 spies gave a different report. Joshua and Caleb said, yes, we can. And they said, no, we can't. The odds are too great. The risk is too much. Number one, they said the people are stronger than us. Number two, they said that land will swallow us up. It devours anyone who comes into it. I wonder how they came to that conclusion. Number three, they said the people are massive. They're giants. Number four, they said they're so big that we are like grasshoppers compared to them. How in the world did they ever come up with that philosophy, with that idea? They said, we're like grasshoppers in front of them. This morning as I was walking out of the prayer room, coming down the hall, I saw something on the floor, and it looked like a little clump of dried up dirt. And so I went down to pick it up, and as I did, it began to move in my hand. And it was a little frog about the size of my thumbnail. I thought, how in the world did this get here? When I think about that, they thought and considered themselves as grasshoppers in the presence of these giants. I looked at that little frog and threw it down. He went to his eternal glory. Wherever that's at. You believe there's animals in heaven? Yeah, we all believe our pet's going to be there. Some of your pets are not going to be there. They said, we're like grasshoppers. And in fact, they look at us like we're grasshoppers. You don't say. You see, they were avoiding the risk. They said, we cannot do it. They saw the obstacles instead of the opportunities. The people are too strong. The cities are too tall. The city walls are too fortified, and they're too high. This report was filled with fear, falsehood, and folly. That's what risk avoiders do. They come up with more excuses than you can count. They embellish. It's foolish. It's full of fear. Fill in this statement under risk avoiders. Risk avoiders embellish the truth, foolishly dismiss God, and retreat in life-controlling fear. They embellished it, didn't they? They embellished the truth. We look like grasshoppers. Yes, there were giants, but they were not giants and they were grasshoppers. No, they were just bigger than they were. They embellished the truth. They made them out to be super giants, unconquerable. Did you know that fear will make us see things that aren't there? Have you ever been there? We all have. We all have. Where fear will make us see things that aren't there. How many times we thought we saw something in the dark, right? Instantly, fear grips us. Fear is a real thing. Did you know that? But you know that God has something to say about fear? He does have something to say about fear. In fact, he mentions it, I believe it's 365 times. He says, do not fear. Do not be afraid. Those phrases are found 365 times within Scripture. You see, what happens is fear will demolish and avoid faith at all cost. Saying no to faith blinds us. It blinds us to that which is true. It blinds us to God's greatness, and it magnifies our own weakness. We feel like we have too much to lose. What did Israel have to lose? I read today the story about the lepers. They're in the midst of famine. They went to the enemy's camp. They said, if we go to the enemy's camp and just kind of plead with them, beg with them, maybe we'll get some food. Either way, if they kill us or we die here, what's the use? What difference does it make? So it says they went to the camp, and as they began to walk, God began to, again, by God's design, began to multiply their footsteps. And the enemy thought that all of the armies of Israel, and they hired others who were coming. It sounded like a vast and a huge army that they hightailed it, and they ran out of the camp. They left everything behind. In fact, on the way to the border, they began to toss things off because they wanted to run it quicker and faster, but they could ever make it. Why? Because of fear. Of course, the lepers got there. Boy, they had their heyday. Everything they wanted. And they went back to the city. They said, in Samaria, they said, hey, the enemy is left. There they went. And what was sold, a donkey's head, for an exuberant amount of silver, now flour, provisions, staples, were sold virtually next to nothing. You see, sometimes we need to recognize that within this aspect of faith, you need to step out. And if you want to avoid risk, you will magnify the fear. You will underestimate God. And you will take everything upon yourself. You see, how many times has fear paralyzed us? Where we can't move. You've had that time physically when you may have been fearful. And it's like you can't move. The same way with fear in our faith. It will paralyze our faith. Other times, faith procrastinates in doubt. How many struggle with procrastination? Yeah. What happens in the area of procrastination, our spiritual walk of faith, guess what happens? We don't move. It's not that we can't move, it's that we just simply don't move. Where obedience becomes a burden. walking by faith slows to a crawl. I got news for you. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. Yay! Really? What did I sign up for? This world is filled with conflict. We all want to see miracles, right? What do you need to have a miracle? Faith? I'm looking for an answer. I'm not hearing it. Conflict. You need a miracle situation in order to see a miracle. Pastor, I want to see miracles, but I don't want to go through it in order to have a miracle situation needed. You see, the thing is, we will face conflict. Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble. He was sharing that with his disciples, with his followers. He was preparing them for what will happen. Conflict is a given. Challenges are frequent. And temptations, let me tell you, they are relentless. Christianity is not for the faint-hearted or weak faith. We just can't take a break. Say, time out. You can't just run away from it or quit. You see, we have to have a resolved faith that in this world I will face trouble. But I didn't finish what Jesus said. He said, in this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. Woo. You know what that takes? Faith. When you walk through times in life when the world throws everything against you, but yet you say, look at you, Lord. I'm trying to be cheerful through all of this. You said, be of good cheer. Let my heart be raised and my spirit be lifted. I trust in you. Why? Because you have overcome. It says in God's word that crying may last for a night, or sorrow may last for a night, but joy comes in the morning. You see, Israel's avoidance of risk was not just a simple act of disobedience. It was an outright rebellion. They took avoiding risk to a new level. In chapter 14, verse 1. So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by this sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and let us return to Egypt. Think about it. They wept all night long. Woo. They were in deep, dark depression, excessive misery. Your older people know about that too, right? Hee-haw? Yeah. They were in a place where they were distraught. They complained against the leadership. Moses and Aaron, what do you think you're doing? God, what are you doing? You brought us out here to die. It'd be better if we would die in Egypt or die in the wilderness rather than go and have the enemy defeat us this way. Our children and our wives will be defenseless. They thought that they were going to be overcome with great ruin. They would die by the sword. Better if we go back to Egypt. And it said they tried to appoint a leader to do so. What happened? They rebelled against God. Not only did they avoid the risk and by faith disobedience, but they turned against God. Instead of turning to God, they turned against Him. They said, the promise, God, that you have made to us, we rebel against it. It's not true. It's not going to happen. We're not going there. Your provisions, yeah, we've seen them, but you're not providing right now. What kind of God are you? They completely rebelled against God. When we avoid the risk of faith, we defiantly rebel against God. Yes. Some of us want to avoid every risk possible. But if you do that spiritually, you'll find yourself on the other end of what God expects from you. Your spiritual life, your faith, your growth will slow down to a crawl. Eventually you'll come to a point where you'll have nothing. And then you'll turn against Him. And you'll want to go back to the world. That's what happens to people who are risk avoiders or have lacked faith. But then Caleb spoke up. Joshua and Caleb stood passionately before them, and they exhorted them. In verse 7 of chapter 14, they spoke to all the children of Israel, saying, "The land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then He will bring us into this land and will give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." Risk takers. Yes, there are risk managers, there are risk avoiders, but there are risk takers. Joshua and Caleb were two of them. They said, "Hey, folks, we can't act this way. God is greater than that. Their strength is gone. They are a defeated foe. They are for us. They will be bowing at our feet." You see, Joshua and Caleb mentioned God oftentimes. But the 10 spies, as you go back and read the report, they did not mention God one time. They dwelt on fear, and it terrified them. The 10 spies saw giants. Joshua and Caleb saw God. Why? Because Joshua and Caleb knew that this was a God thing. They knew that this was God's will and God's desire. Despite the obstacles, despite the risk, it was directed by God. Fear not, do not be afraid. Of course, 365 times in God's Word. Risk takers do this. Okay? Risk takers do this. They simply take God at His word. What God promises, they'll pursue. What God directs, they will simply follow. You know what it takes? It takes trust. Solomon wrote in the book of Proverbs, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge Him in all your ways, and He will direct your paths." Verse 24, later, Caleb says, Caleb followed the Lord wholeheartedly. What's that mean, wholeheartedly? It means he followed Him completely, with fidelity and faithfulness and loyalty. In fact, 6 times it mentions of Caleb that he followed the Lord wholeheartedly. He followed the Lord with every inch, with every ounce, with every nerve and fiber. There was no holding back. He was a man that was driven by faith, and he was willing to take a risk. If God said it, let's do it. No questions. Yeah, there's obstacles. Yes, there's large men. There's fortified cities. Yes, but God's there. Their strength is removed because God has given us strength, and God will conquer them. Fill in this last statement here under risk takers number 3. Nothing of significance ever happens apart from someone taking a risk of faith. Nothing of significance ever happens unless we take a risk of faith. Risk faith takers engage in giant warfare. When was the last time you tackled a giant? What do you mean, Pastor? What's the last time that your finances came against you? How'd you handle it? Well, of course, you're supposed to figure it out. You're supposed to be wise with your money. I understand all of that. You do everything that you can do, and then you recognize, hey, God, you're the one in control. How do you know that risk takers will take everything to God by faith and say, okay, God, what do we need to do? How many times have we battled the things that have come against us in the area of finances, or our health, or our family, or in relationships? When you look at all those obstacles and all those challenges, how do they compare to God? God says, do not fear them, for the Lord is with you. Yes. There's sickness, there's surgeries, there's heart valves that need to be repaired, there's knees that need to be replaced, there's backs that need to be adjusted, there's casts that need to be put on. The list can go on and on and on and on. But yet, my friends, that if we want to avoid that, by faith we can. But yet, God says, you step out of faith and believe me, and I will show you things beyond what you could ever think or even imagine. If God be for us, who can be against us? You see, that's a risk taker. When's the last time you fought against giants? 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. Really, a sound mind? Yes. It all goes together. Spirit of fear, power, and a sound mind. There we recognize and we understand that power, love, and a sound mind, God brings it together. You know, faith takers and risk takers overcome the grasshopper spirit. They don't say it can't be done, but they say it can be done. They said the Lord will bring us to victory. Why? Because the Lord said. Because the Lord promised. And I'm just stepping out. And I'm just doing. They tackle that and overcome the grasshopper spirit. Like Joshua and Caleb, guess what? They stood alone. Sometimes in your life you feel like you're standing alone. Nobody understands, but you're standing alone in faith. You're standing alone believing. Well, who are the only two to enter the promised land? Joshua and Caleb, the men who stood alone. Looked at the risk avoiders and the risk managers and said, hey, we can do this. Let's take a risk. Let's believe in faith. Let's just step out and let's see what God can do, because God has promised that He'll provide. Wholeheartedly, he followed. Caleb followed God wholeheartedly. And there it says that after 40 years, after a 40-year journey through the wilderness, as God had all of that generation die out, only Joshua and Caleb were the ones that would remain to enter the promised land. Nothing of significance ever happens unless you take a risk of faith. I think many of you can testify of that. There's some things that you have in your life and in the past times that you stood in faith and you believed God and you prayed and you trusted, and God brought a miracle. God brought an answer. God brought deliverance. How's that happen? It's because you took a stand and you were willing to risk whatever it was to see God do what God needed to do. The greatest time of your spiritual growth is when you took a risk. I can guarantee you, today, you can think of all the times, very quickly, of the times when you were down and out, or the times that you needed Him the most, the times you needed a miracle, and then God came through. There are very few things you remember about your past, but you'll always remember those. Why? Because it's when God came through and you took a risk. You decided to leave everything. You said, Lord, whether I drowned, whether I survived, you're still God. And God came in the midst of your desperation. You see what faith does? Faith leaves comfort zones and accepts God's risky call. How many enjoyed David Delp's ministry last week as he shared? Man, what a testimony. And I shared this with you last week, but I just want to reiterate it. David Delp was in a comfortable position. He was well recognized and revered, and he spoke into many, many lives throughout our state. In a place where he could have stayed to a time of retirement and had everything that he would need for retirement. But God began to stir his faith and said, would you take a risk and step out and go to an area where I need you? God, how? All you got to do is go and raise $12,000 a month. About $120,000 cash. No. You know that's what he needs in order to do what God's called him to do. See, he's a risk taker. He's going to step into faith. Why? Because he knows that God called him and God delivered him. And God has prepared his steps and directed him. You see, that is the simple thing about risk. Where there is no risk, there is no faith. And where there's no faith, guess what? There is no growth. The last statement on the sheet. How big is the risk? Or how big is your God? You see, risk takers do not measure the depth of the risk, but they measure the greatness of their God. Charles Swindoll posed this question: does your absolute confidence in God free you to risk everything to obey? You ask me a question today: what are you risking your life for? What are you risking your life for? What are those parts in your life where you're kind of stepping out and maybe going against the odds or just testing the water, whether it's in finances or marriage or careers or wherever it is? What are you risking your life for? Is your life a series of pointless risks? Will you come to a place where you just want to be comfortable? I'm too old. I'm not what I used to be. My finances aren't there where they need to be. My health, my family. I've got too many kids. I don't have enough kids. The excuses can go on and on and on and on and on. What are you risking your life for? What is God asking of you? Are you questioning, or are you sure? You see, I want to challenge you this morning because I believe that God has something for you. Are you willing to take the risk? What is He asking you to do? It may be just a glimmer. It may be something that just is not significant, but it's just in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit, and it's there, and it's like, someday I'll get to it, or whenever. But what's God dropped in your heart? To either do or to be. But you begin to weigh the situation, and you're going, no, I don't know if I can do it right now. The timing's off, or this or that. And you come with all the excuses because of the odds, because of the risk. You're trying to manage the faith and manage the risk. But what God just simply asks you to do is what He lays upon your heart, just to simply do it. It takes guts. It takes faith. It takes believing in someone that is greater, where it's out of your control. You are just the one that is the funnel which He flows through. You are His instrument. You are the one that begins to do things. What is God's sized vision for you? Have you ever asked Him? Has He told you? For these kids, they have a lot of visions, they have a lot of dreams, they have a lot of hopes. But what does God want for you? And we're sitting here today, we're going, man, I wish I was in their place to see everything that God has for them. The It'd be nice, but you don't sit there. You're not too old. You're not too far removed. God's not finished with you yet. There's some of you today, God is dropping some things in your heart and your spirit. And I just want to encourage you today that you need to follow that. And you need to step out in faith. And you need to say, whether I fall, whether I fail, it doesn't matter what kind of danger, what kind of repercussions it brings within my life. I just want to simply obey and step out, God, and see what you're going to do. What do we need? You need to season that in prayer. You need to spend time with God and let Him build your faith. You need to get your nose and your eyes in God's Word, and you need to read it. You need to write some things down, and you need to memorize that, and you need to just totally involve yourself around that. My closet, our closet at home, is a prayer closet, literally. When I walk in my closet, I see papers, I see scriptures, I see requests all over my closet. Yvonne makes it. That's where she goes. That's where she goes to retreat and be alone with the Lord. And there God begins to strengthen her faith and begins to build her so she can walk out of that closet and out of that prayer closet. And there she can face the day and she can face life. Why? Because she knows she has just met with God. Don't expect, my friends, for your life to turn around if you don't involve yourself or have Him involved with your life. It's not just a quick prayer. Then God just does it. I was thinking the other day, and I was praying, I was asking God, I want you to do this, I want to see that, da-da-da-da-da. And I was thinking to myself, wouldn't that be nice just to have the golden Midas touch, just whatever you touch, whatever you said, and then I recognize that's in God's hands, not mine. If that was the case, it was in my hands, I would not have any problems. You guys, you would have a great life. Man, anything and everything you want. Boom, 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 boom. What does God want? It's because through trials, we're made strong. As David preached last week, he says, out of my bad circumstances, God is going to bring forth good. You see, Jesus is preparing you, my friends, not for tomorrow, but He's preparing you for eternity. And it takes faith. You season that in prayer. Your faith is strengthened from the Word of God. You got to wrestle in prayer. You got to seek His Word and listen to His voice in your spirit before you can go for what you need to be sure and grounded in faith. Faith no longer becomes a risk when you know what God says and what He directs. Of course, Caleb waited for more than 40 years. It's probably about 45 years from this event when they finally conquered the land of Israel. And there, Caleb spoke up to Joshua, and he said, "You know that land over there of Hebron? The land of giants? He said, that mountain right there, that's what I want." Old gray-haired man, full of vigor, full of strength, full of faith. He said, "Give me this mountain." May God raise a Caleb spirit up in you. May you not have the spirit of Israel, but you may have a spirit of Caleb raised up in you where you will follow the Lord wholeheartedly and you will faithfully pursue Him, follow Him, and you're going to take risks, you're going to listen to His voice, and you're just going to follow in line with whatever He has for you. And I can guarantee you, my friends, when you begin to do that, you will find God ever at your side. Some of you today are facing some situations in your life, and this is an opportunity for you to step forward in faith or to retreat doubt and despair, or to retreat in unbelief. The choice is yours. Do you want to go through another 40 years of wilderness experience? Or do you want to step out in faith? The smallest of faith. The smallest step, and just say, okay, God, I'm all in. I'm all in. And if you have to close your eyes to do it, close your eyes. And you'll find God will be with you. Yes, there is a risk in life. You have to claim your possession. You have to go for it. But it starts by taking a risk of faith. Would you stand this morning? Heavenly Father, I want to thank you today for your word. I want to thank you today that you love and you care for us. Lord, there's a lot of miracles standing in this place today. When I think about their lives individually and their families, God, the potential that's in this sanctuary today is immense. Lord, if only 2 or 3 of us would take hold of you and abandon everything else that God just pursued you and stepped out of faith, God, what a difference that would make. Just a handful in this congregation would do that. Lord, what would it do to propel your work here in this church, in our community, in our nation? Lord, may we not sit by the sidelines, on the sidelines anymore. But God, may we, by faith, rise up. Follow and pursue that which you have laid upon our hearts and upon our lives. Lord, this is not a message today for the faint of heart. It is not for those who are just trying to play a game. This is not a message today, and your call is not one for those who are complacent and apathetic. But Lord, this call today is for those who will respond to you and who are open. You are the one, Lord, that makes us able and capable. And Lord, I would pray, God, that you would speak to every heart right now. Lord, that we would know your voice, touch, your hand. Lord, may we say yes. Yes to you. God, give us faith today to pursue you with great passion for those that are before us, and God, ministries and lives. And Lord, it doesn't mean that we're going to go and stand and preach on the corners of DeMotte or our community. But Lord, what it means is that, Lord, if you call us to next door to share, or to simply pray with someone at the store or wherever it's at. God, if it's ministering, if it's handing out popsicles and freeze pops on a 4th of July, God, use that. Lord, may your Spirit speak to us as we hand those out. And God, as the parking lot attendants give direction to people, Lord, I pray that, God, that you would just fill them with insight as they talk with people going to and fro. And Lord, that you just give a heart and a burden. And God, they just be silently praying. Lord, it's not about fireworks. It's about the work that you can do in their hearts and their lives. So, Lord, this is my desire today, and this is our prayer. Lord, whatever you ask, we will do. In Jesus' name. Are we ready to step out of faith? After that preaching, I only got 5 hands. How many ready to step out in faith? Show me. I went to school in Missouri, the Show Me State. Prove it. It's easy to do this, isn't it? Darren, what does God have for you? You know a little bit, don't you? Got some things stirring in you? I wanted to come up, but I didn't think you'd come up that way. You're good people, you know that? You know God's given us a good church. Hey, John came up today and prayed for me. And he prophesied over me and he said, be bold. What God has placed in your heart, be bold about it. So, nah. You're getting it. With every barrel that I have. Why? Because I love you. Because God loves you even more. Can we sing this song this morning? Raise our voice. I raise a hallelujah. I raise a
hallelujah in the presence of my enemies. I raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief. And I raise a hallelujah. My weapon is the melody, and I raise a hallelujah. And heaven comes to fight for me. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm, louder and louder. You're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. The death is defeated, the King is alive.
I raise a hallelujah.
I raise a hallelujah. When everything is silent, and I raise a hallelujah. And I will wash the darkness free. And I raise a hallelujah in the middle of the mystery. And I raise a hallelujah. And fear lost your hold on me. But I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. And death is defeated, the King is alive. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar.
Can you do that right now? Can you raise your voice? This is how it